Welcome to the Table Podcast, where we discuss issues of God and culture, brought to you by Dallas Theological Seminary.
Welcome to the Table. We discuss issues of God and culture. I'm Darrell Bock, Executive Director for Cultural Engagement at the Hendricks Center here at Dallas Theological Seminary. And our topic today is film, the arts, the Christian, and in particular, Sundance Film Festival. Now, those of you who are aware of the calendar know that the Sundance Film Festival takes place normally in January. It takes place in January. It's not normally. It takes place in January. But we have waited a few months to talk about it to kind of see where Sundance lands. And I have two really qualified people to talk with me about this. First is Claude Alexander, who is leader at the Park Church in Charlotte, North Carolina, and has been there for 29 years. That's not bad, Claude. That's a good long tenure. What is that? 33. 33. We need to update your bio. Okay. Yeah, all right. Yeah. You're chasing me. I'm in my 42nd year here at Dallas Seminary. So
there we go.
There we go. Yeah.
There we go.
So, and he also serves as the chaplain for Windrider, a group we'll be talking about later on in the podcast. And then Craig Detweiler is president of the Wedgwood Circle and dean of College of Arts and Media at Grand Canyon University. And has a variety of film credits to his name, as well as written several books related to the arts and film, Deep Focus, Film and Theology and Dialogue in particular. So I couldn't have two more qualified people to think about the integration of theology and film than Claude and Craig. So let me dive in. And Craig, I'll start with you. How did a guy like you get into a gig like this? How in the world does someone who's thinking about theology end up focusing their life on film?
I think because film animated my imagination and stirred my spirit. Before I had ever heard the words personal relationship and Jesus Christ in the same sentence. And so my categories for understanding faith kind of fell in after I tried to understand, like, what does manhood look like based on, Humphrey Bogart or, Robert De Niro or, all of these, maybe non-role models that I was studying in film, but trying to figure out, how to live a purposeful life. I guess movies were giving me an idea of like what happy endings look like and how you write them. And so I've always integrated these two things, faith and film.
So in the beginning there was film and then there was Christ.
Maybe in my own heart and mind. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's pretty interesting. Claude, how did you get interested in this topic?
Well, film was something that my mom and I would always do. And so I loved film. I mean, I just loved movies. And then in the course of going to seminary at Pittsburgh Theological Seminary, there was a course, Theology and Film. And that was it. That was all that it took in terms of the integration. And so since that was around 1987, so it's been on since 1987.
And how does one, Craig, how does one train? Maybe that's not the right word, but how does one train to integrate theology and film? I think for a lot of people, they seem like two such very different things. Of course, at their core, they're all dealing with issues of life. But how does one train for that?
Well, in both cases, you're dealing with a text. One begins with a written word. One maybe begins more with a visual word, with moving images. So in both cases, you're trying to unpack a story. You're trying to figure out maybe the surface meaning, and then try to get the subtext. Try to do some history. Try to do some homework. So whether you're doing biblical exegesis or maybe a visual exegesis of film, it's really similar. It's trying to get at the author's intent. It's trying to get at how it applies and what it means, what it meant in its day and what it means for me today. And so I don't see it as complementary. In fact, in our book, we talk about the lenses, right, that we bring to film. Maybe a visual lens, maybe a cinematographer's lens, a audio lens, a musical lens. And then we're doing the same thing with scripture. We're bringing our lenses of our life, and what are the lenses that were influencing the author? And then how do we find, in a sense, God's lens? What's the Spirit saying to us through that process?
I was talking to someone earlier this week or the end of last week, I guess, about film, about The Chosen. We were talking about that in particular. And I said, what most people don't realize when something like that gets done, how many questions a cinematographer has to ask, or a director, about everyday life. That, what does this look like? How did this work? How does that happen, et cetera, which most people probably don't even think about being a part of really trying to present a film if you're going to be wrestling with the authenticity of what it is you're looking at as you look back in time.
Well, and I think if we, again, go back to Scripture and start to understand why was Jesus pulling all these, our agricultural metaphors or fishing metaphors, it's like, well, that's what he was there. That was the context, right? He's literally pointing to something that's all around that people can see and hear, and might be right in front of them as kind of daily reminders and sermon illustrations.
So Claude, as a pastor, and I know you've got family that has stayed in this space as well. I think is your daughter still at Windrider working there?
No, now she is in Ecuador with the Peace Corps.
Oh, wow. Girl on the move.
That's called the 20s, right? That's your 20s.
Yeah. Interesting. So, but she worked a while at Windrider. Talk about your association with Windrider as a chaplain there, and what attracted you to doing that.
So, besides the fact that my daughter was there, the fact that here is an institution with a theological underpinning. It's tied to Fuller Seminary, that is effectively engaging the arts and culture space in a major way by its presence at Sundance. You don't get a greater open door than that. And so to see the commitment that John Pretty and others have to that, to see the level of excellence at which they operate, to witness the reach. I mean, to be able to bring on these producers and directors of major films, to have served in the development of an Oscar winner, all of that appealed to me, and it was just something I couldn't refuse.
So Windrider hosts us when we take students to Sundance and provides a Christian lens, to use Craig's term, into the world of the arts and thinking about the world of the arts and what it offers to Christians. When I tell people that I spend 1 week out of the academic year at the Sundance Film Festival as a New Testament person who also works in cultural engagement, I think people look at me cross-eyed and say, what? How does that work? So let's talk a little bit about film and the arts, because I think this is an important conversation. So let's talk about what is Sundance, and why should what happens at Sundance matter to people of faith? Craig?
Well, it's the largest market for independent film in America, and probably one of the most influential, I would say, in a sense, kingmakers or queen makers regarding talent, new talent. And so going there puts you ahead of the cultural conversation, a solid, 6 months, in some cases, maybe 3-4 years. At Sundance, we were there when Ava DuVernay won Best Director, way before she did, a film like Selma. We saw Ryan Coogler's first film Fruitvale Station, far before he did Black Panther. Damien Chazelle broke through with winning a film called Whiplash, won at Sundance way before La La Land was competing and winning Oscars. So it's a chance to meet the culture shapers and makers, and get ahead of what's coming and start to, I think, exegete the cultural conversation and think about a thoughtful response before it hits the broader culture.
Claude, as I think about this, and this is one of the reasons we take students, is it's a way of putting your ear to the ground and listening to what the culture is wrestling with about life, and thinking through those kinds of issues, and hearing people wrestling to put life together who may not have a connection to God, but are still trying to ask core questions about how life works. And I find that to be pretty fascinating.
Well, the old adage Karl Barth said, have your Bible and a newspaper, right? Well, in today's society, it's have your Bible and you have film or media, visual media.
Mm-hmm.
And the way in which we come to terms with understanding the thoughts, beliefs, feelings, perceptions is really generated through visual arts and visual media. So the opportunity to be exposed, as Craig said, 6 months to 3 years ahead of time, because independent film, that's where it's happening. And that's where the cutting edge is. And so to be able to be present there gives us an unusual opportunity worth taking advantage of.
And for me, the opportunity is, like I say, putting kind of an ear to the ground with what people are wrestling with and how they see the world and how they are thinking about what's happening in front of them and trying to make sense out of it. I mean, you go to the film festival and you watch these films that really deal with very interesting kinds of topics. I'm thinking in particular, and I'm trying to think of the name of this as I'm thinking about it, but you sit down and there was one film, for example, I think it's called A Still Small Voice, that took a close look at chaplaincy training at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York. And you're watching chaplains being trained and what they're having to deal with and face at some of life's most traumatic moments. And the filmmaker is trying to process it. Of course, we interviewed the filmmaker and we asked him, so how did this film impact you to be filming these situations where, you're ministering to a couple that's just lost a child in a miscarriage, or in fact, the interesting scene was we had a Jewish chaplain who was performing a prayer and a service for a Christian family that had lost a child and was engaged in a form of Christian liturgy as a Jewish person because he was just trying to minister to this person. And it was a very poignant moment in the entire film. Meanwhile, she's struggling with all she's having to cope with in the midst of all that. And the tensions that interview. I mean, that's life as it's happening in many ways. So to me, it seems that one of the values is this ability to kind of overhear what people are wrestling with and struggling with and trying to put life together. And I think that makes for very interesting reflection for someone who is also thinking about the gospel and what God's doing in the world. That's an open-ended comment and can go to either of you. What do you think?
Bishop?
Well, in listening to him, he also had a relative who was in the chaplaincy that served as the motivation that piqued his curiosity. And so being drawn in through that, was personal, and you could sense how personal it was by the way in which he made it. Craig can speak to how a director's or a producer's personal experience and motivation impacts how a film is done and what one feels. But that's certainly an example of that.
Well, you know, from the beginning with Windrider, we've always wanted to bring aspiring filmmakers who have a chance to kind of learn from role models, as well as ministers in training, or maybe ministers are already in the field, who are trying to figure out, you know, what are those questions being asked by these artists or being asked through the stories that these artists are telling. And so I think Sundance being really strong in the documentary category gives us windows into major world conflicts that are hard to get our heads around. But I think even last year there was 20 Days in Mariupol.
Yep, I'm going there next, so that's good. Bring it up.
Right, the Russian invasion.
Yeah,
the Russian invasion in Ukraine. Right, couldn't be more timely. And yet to have a camera that's there.
Yep.
Right, sitting with the victims, sitting with the folks struggling with it, it's going to move your heart. It's going to move your mind. And then it's going to cause you to go deeper and try to understand more, and then also try to understand, where is Jesus in the middle of that conflict, and how do I respond as a person of faith? So whether it's chaplaincy, whether it's, there was a beautiful doc called The Eternal Memory about Alzheimer's. Maybe you're dealing with aging in your congregation, or, Beyond Utopia was about, Pastor Kim in helping defectors from North Korea, right? These are major geopolitical conflicts that all have these faith issues kind of floating around and essentially as part of them. And so rather than seeing those things as separate from us, Sundance gets it into your soul, I think, in the right kind of way.
Oh, that's a great description, because I was just going to say, one of the things that these films do, because they're usually done, if it's done by a competent crew, it is to pull you in and make you experience what you are seeing to a degree. And so rather than it being an abstract discussion with no names, no faces, no reality, it's in cinematographic Technicolor or whatever, with Dolby sound on top of it. And you're pulled in, and of course when you're in a theater, you're kind of immersed in what's in front of you. And so it's maybe the ultimate Baptist experience of immersion. I don't know, but so you're confronted with this, and if the characterization is done well, of course, you get a sense of knowing the people and what they're wrestling with in the midst of these often challenging scenarios, which I think causes anyone with any kind of sensitive or pastoral heart to be sensitive to what's going on around them relationally, and not just doctrinally, if I can make that distinction. And so all of that, it seems to me, is important in developing someone who's thinking about being a mature Christian in a world that's obviously filled with all kinds of challenges because of the fallenness of the world that we live in.
Yeah. Darrell, you mentioned the last word, fallenness. One of the themes that ran throughout our time was the notion of brokenness.
Mm-hmm.
And how many of the filmmakers were seeking to address that in one form or another. How do we come to terms with it? How do we rise above it? The ability to own it and transcend it. That was a constant theme throughout.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that I find attractive, having gone now for a few years, is everyone's dealing with, they recognize what's going on, and they're trying to come to grips with it, and to see it from this angle or that angle is a way of kind of beginning to come to grips with sometimes how complex some of these situations that people put themselves in can be, or that life circumstances put them in. So brokenness is a good term, and it does something else, Claude, that I think is important. That's a good alternative term to fallenness, because I think one of the things that Christians do is they will park on the fallenness part. This is where this comes up short, okay? Whereas it's the brokenness that produces the pastoral connection and relational connection that also has to be dealt with. And so both of those are important in the conversation. And what I find, and I think this is what surprised me about my own Sundance experience, is there are so many things that non-believers, I'll say it that way, are seeing and feeling and sensing that I tend to think sometimes in the church we miss because we're in the fallenness box rather than the brokenness box.
Yeah. So a prime example of that, one of those short films, Just Hold On.
Yes.
About the girl who rides sheep, but she also has pediatric cancer.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that is transcending brokenness. That is her ability to rise above this, what many would say, cuts life off, but she doesn't allow it to do so. She rises above it. Now whether that gets, a lot of play or not, that movie is powerful in its ability to show how we rise above.
Mm-hmm. Another one along that line is the one movie, I think it won the award this last year in one of the categories, don't remember which, Scrapper, which was about a dad who picked up a relationship with a child, abandoned child who had been returned to him after mom died. And of course, he wasn't planning on ever being a parent to this child. And the movie is about his having to adjust to the presence of this responsibility, for lack of a better description, located in inner city London, with all the all the accents attached thereunto, and in that part of the city, and the challenge of just watching someone cope with having to care for someone when really it seems like, I think the movie kind of reflected this, it was someone who wasn't used to having to think about caring for someone else and building that relationship, et cetera. I mean, those are the kinds of themes that show up at Sundance that are in the middle of really what ministry oftentimes ends up being. People who have walked into a situation in life that is challenging them immensely, and they're looking for help.
Yeah. Well, and film, I think at its best, I believe Roger Ebert called it an empathy machine.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's literally generating, feelings of identification, whether it's with the dad in Scrapper, whether it's with a single mom in a film like Flora and Son, whether it's with Iranian families in the Persian version, whether it's with, a teacher in Mexico in a film like Radical. It's both an empathy machine and it's also a transportation engine. Right. So it's transporting you to places that you could not easily go, dropping you into situations that you may not be familiar with, and then allowing you, as Bishop Alexander mentioned, right, to kind of be ushered to a higher plane, a different plane of response, a more transcendent space, because you're out of your comfort zone now. And now your eyes and ears are more attuned to what's happening with other people. And that's when you start to see, if Jesus loves this person, how do I need to love this person? How do I need to care for this person and respond to this situation rather than judging it? Can I enter into it in a compassionate way?
And it does so in a... Go ahead, Claude. Go ahead.
You mentioned that the movie Scrapper, and what another part that made it compelling is that it's looking at it from a child's point of view.
Yes.
How the director chooses to give the point of view, can totally alter the experience,
mm-hmm.
right? And so in that one is from the child's point of view. There was a movie that we saw, not this past year, but the year before, where it was from the wheelchair point of view.
Yes.
Do you remember the name of that?
Yeah, I don't remember the name of it, but it was filmed with the camera on the edge of the wheelchair. So you're looking at everything from that angle. I mean, that was an unbelievable piece of work.
Right. And so how one chooses to even frame, not just by way of the framing, but the point of view, opens up possibilities of consideration that you would not normally have.
Yep. And the thing that I found interesting, and this is one of the things another thing that I really enjoy about the week is the films come from all over the world. You know, so, I mean, in just the, 10, 15 minutes we've been talking about these films, we've talked about a film that's in the UK. We've talked about a film that's in the Ukraine. We've talked about a film that has Persian roots. I remember, this was 2 years ago now, I think there was a woman who, there were two films juxtaposed to each other if you paid attention. One was in a maternity ward in hospitals in the U.S., maternity wards in hospitals in the U.S., and the other was a woman who gave pregnancy care in where was it? Somewhere in Asia, and like Myanmar, someplace like that, where there also were religious tensions associated with who she cared for, that kind of thing. You know, and you get you're plunged not only to a visual experience and a reflection about life's brokenness, but oftentimes you're plunged in a cross-cultural way that you have very little chance of replicating, as Craig mentioned earlier. I think that's part of the attraction of what happens at Sundance, and you can hear in the undercurrent of what I'm saying that usually when Christians go to film, they go to film to critique it. And say this is how this doesn't match up to the Bible or whatever. But actually there are things going on in films that are worth observing and reflecting on and not coming so much with that critical lens only, but also coming with a lens that says, okay, I want to understand the human experience that's being portrayed here and think about what would be the best way to step into and minister to someone who's in this kind of a situation. Craig, talk about that a little bit, and then we'll talk about some of the technical aspects of film.
Well, it brings to mind the Leonard Cohen line from one of his songs that says, "There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in." I think that's where the beginning with brokenness is. You enter into that if you make room in your own heart, right? More space in our own hearts through these films, you might find God surprising you in how He's expanding your own vision, your own heart. The film you mentioned, I Didn't See You There. It took you inside Reed Davenport's experience as someone who is experiencing life from a wheelchair and literally seeing things literally from his point of view, like where he sits and thinking about curbs differently and thinking about streets differently and buses and apartments. And
the way people look away when he shows up. I mean, it's
right there in the title.
Exactly.
I Didn't See You There.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So yes, I think having to deal with people who are not like us, who might be viewed as other, whether that's the Afghan immigrant experience in a film like Fremont, whether that's what's going on with Native American women in a film like Fancy Dance. I just find myself a richer person from having given myself, 90 minutes, 2 hours of these folks' vision of life and where they're coming from. And
it inevitably causes you to reflect. If it's done well, it inevitably leads you to a place of reflection about an array of life's circumstances. Let me mention another film that at least I saw that I thought was interesting that, as far as I know, hasn't been picked up, but raised interesting questions. It was what's called iPod Generation. It was the film about AI and imagining a world in which it would be possible to how can I say this, to give birth to a child without the child actually being in a physical woman's womb, but in a but in a technologically produced environment, and the experience of thinking about that, and then the play that took place, because in this case it was a woman working for a corporation who wanted her to utilize this service so she could continue to be employed all the way through her pregnancy. Meanwhile, her husband, who originally didn't want to have anything to do with it, because this artificial womb, I don't know how else to describe it, was at home and he had to care for it, developed a connection that the woman didn't have. I mean, this is breaking all kinds of stereotypes and stuff, and done with such a sense of humor from a producer, I think, who was from Belgium, or at least from Europe. I don't remember if it's Belgian or not, but anyway, the Belgians would do something like this. Anyway, it's that to me was an interesting film because it shows the way imagination can work in areas of terms of speculating where we could be headed.
Yeah. Did you see the Pod Generation, Bishop Claude?
I did.
Yeah.
I did. Yeah.
It's available on, I think you can see it on Amazon or Roku or wherever you buy and rent movies. It's out there now. Oh,
well, that's good, because I actually thought it was, it raised, the group I saw it with, the group of students I saw, we were talking about it for, a long while after we walked out of the film, just because of the array of it. We talked about it in two ways. One, just the issue itself, and then secondly, the skill that we thought the people who put the film together approached a delicate topic and used humor, among other things, to get there.
Yeah. That's that French director, Sophie Bart. Yeah, she's charming. Did you like the film, Bishop Claude? Do you remember it?
I did, and this so many different levels that it addresses. Role reversal, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
In terms of the husband as opposed to the wife. This notion of freedom versus responsibility. So the continuation of technology being able to, quote unquote, free us, remove us from things, and what happens when we go there.
Mm-hmm. And institutional pressure, because she was doing this solely because the company that she was working for was asking her to do it, demanding her to do it, rewarding her for doing it. I mean, take your pick, right?
Yeah. All of the above. And again, the scary part is how close one really is to that.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. You were talking about earlier, we were talking about how Sundance kind of puts us ahead of the game in terms of what's being talked about culturally.
Yeah.
Well, here it's an example of Sundance looking forward and making us think about what may be lying ahead.
Yeah.
That's right.
Good.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah, it's a fascinating piece. So let's do a little scorecard checking. Okay, so Craig, this is you. Sundance took place in January. Of course, what happens is people display their films, and they're hoping that they get picked up so they can get into wider distribution. Right? I mean, that's the market part of the business part of Sundance. Yep. So how did that do this last year? I mean, where did stuff land?
So the two biggest films to sell, they each sold for around $20 million. A film called Fair Play sold to Netflix, and it's a very, I would call it a dark thriller, about men and women and Wall Street and maybe toxic, insecure masculinity and how far you're willing to go if women are getting promotions that you aren't, and where jealousy leads. And so that one's heavy, and that's on Netflix. But then Flora and Son was bought by Apple. It stars Bono's daughter, Eve Hewson, as a single mom.
Oh, I didn't know that, huh?
A teen son that she's trying to reach. And it was made by the gentleman who's a musician by background who made Sing Street and Once. And so it really allows us to use music as a way to kind of lift our spirits, lift out of our situations, imagine a different world from us. Apple bought it because it involves coaching by a guitar teacher via Zoom and via the computer. So it's about how the power of computer allows us to connect, and the power of computers to make beats and make sounds. So it's a bit of a film about creativity, allowing us to get out of our feels like maybe a trapped situation. So Flora and Son is the feel-good film of the fall, which just released on Apple.
So, and I've got some others here. Still and Underrated and 1001, and they end up all over the place. Apple, Hulu, Peacock.
That's right.
And in fact, I think one that we alluded to earlier that we haven't developed, I want to go back to, 12 Days in Mariupol, which was about the siege of Mariupol at the very beginning of the Ukrainian-Russian conflict, which ended up, I think, on PBS through the summer, et cetera, one of their major documentary presentations, taking a close look not only at the war, but also giving people a feel of what it takes to be a really top-flight photojournalist in a difficult situation.
That's right. Well, the hard part is there's so much good work. It's very hard to find these things. And you oftentimes, if you blink, you'll miss it, which, Apple, like they funded the Michael Fox documentary Still, the Steph Curry documentary Underrated, the Judy Blume documentary. There's a Little Richard documentary. So when you have a celebrity, that's easier to kind of get your head around. When it's maybe a story that you haven't seen, like 1001, that's available on Hulu now. You've got Tiana Taylor, a great actor. She's a musician. She's a known entity, but you haven't seen her in this kind of dramatic setting.
Right.
And if you blink, you kind of miss it, in theaters, yet it's really beautifully done, hard film, but also beautiful film about dedication and love. Rye Lane is also on Hulu. If you're looking for a Sundance Film Theater Camp is on Hulu. Also, those are a little more like romantic comedies, a little more lighter, kind of flavor and a little more hopeful in how
the one built around celebrity. I mean, the first film that I saw this last year when I was at Sundance was the one that featured Brooke Shields and what her life was like. When she was very, very young, thrust into a very, we might even say prematurely sexualized environment, and the way she looks at all that now and what she sees and how she talks to her kids about it, that kind of thing. A very interesting film. In fact, I was surprised by that film. I walked in saying, "Well, I signed up for this because it was on my menu. I'm not sure I would have volunteered to do this one," but I ended up really being caught by just her wrestling with her own self-awareness, both as she was going through this and then her reflective self-awareness afterwards, having been through it, and just what that did to her in her life. In some ways, a frightening film about how she was, I want to say, taken advantage of in order to be thrust into this limelight simply because she was attractive.
Yeah, and that's also on Hulu if you want to seek it out.
Yeah. So it's interesting how. Go ahead, Claude.
So, one of the things that you're scratching on, Craig, is the role of streaming and how it has really changed the distribution of movies. 10 years ago, there was no Hulu or Netflix or Prime and for people out there who might be listening to this, who've witnessed the recent writer's strike and don't know, can't make heads or tail of it. Can you speak a little bit about that as it relates to how we're viewing films, the access that we have, et cetera?
Yeah, so Sundance and independent film kind of fills in this middle space, right? They're made outside the Hollywood system, so they're made for lower prices, but they also have more freedom of expression. They don't have that pressure, with a Marvel film where it's like they need $200 million just to break even, or a Star Wars update. So these are smaller films that are really about bigger ideas. And right now, the rise of streaming has kind of put a squeeze on independent film, where there's many more outlets, but they're also not paying at the same rates. And so for artists and creators to have a sustained career, they've had to say, hold on, time out. It can't be that there's just like 3 $200 million movies. What about the rest of us? How do we sustain a career in film, in TV? And so the strike was a way of saying, hey, due to technology and AI, the ability to duplicate me or to duplicate my work, we want to say time out, and let's rethink this, and let's come up with an equitable distribution for everybody. And frankly, the streamers have seen good success with Sundance films. A film like Coda was bought, it was made outside the Hollywood system. It was bought at Sundance by Apple, and then it ended up winning the Oscar for Best Picture. So this is what independent voices are capable of if they have that chance to come to the table. So that's what that strike was about. So I'm glad that they're winning.
If someone wants to dip their toe in kind of this independent film / documentary world, is there a place for them to go to either, one, find out what is out there, or two, view some of these films that don't get as wide a distribution? Is there a collection point, or at least an information collection point for what's going on?
Actually, I don't think there is. I think that's a real problem.
Interesting.
Is that the fragmenting of the audience into all these different forms has made it really tough. I think a few labels have become kind of go-to. So a company like A24 has a certain brand identity that allows you to say, okay, I don't trust that studio, but I trust that brand, A24. And so even in the last year at Sundance, they had a film like You Hurt My Feelings, starring Julia Louis-Dreyfus. They had a film like Past Lives by a director, Celine Song, that was just gorgeous. But they also had a breakout hit with a film like Talk to Me, a horror film from Australian YouTubers. So they do a range of products and projects that I think are of a slightly higher quality. You think of an Oscar nominee and a winner like Minari, Korean American immigrant experience film. That was A24 releasing that. So you can trust certain brands within the independent world, I would say.
So that ends up being a challenge then in terms of what goes on. I'm having trouble thinking of the title of this, but the other thing that's interesting is you've got what you might call full-length feature films that, run your 90 minutes or 2 hours. And then you've got these little things called shorts, okay? And as I'm thinking about this, the reason I'm laughing is they may be short on time, but they're not short on content. And the one that I remember is the one made, I think it's of a black filmmaker with it was his father or something who he's caring for, and it's about the special connection that they had in the midst of their developed relationship. Man, I can't remember the title of it, but I do remember thinking, what a interesting work.
Yeah.
Well, and these are segregated on Windrider, right? You can talk about that some.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It actually won the Amplify Award, which was Windrider's first award for a black filmmaker. And I forget the title of the film.
That's fine. I'm going to look it up. Yeah.
Yeah. But it was profound in that it was father-son relationship, grief, mental health, all wrapped up into 5 to 10 minutes. I mean,
and done in animation. Wow. I mean, that's the amazing part of it. And
done in animation.
Yeah, told the story, but did it in animation. It didn't just do it straight. And so, just a fascinating film about connection. I mean, I remember, they had a certain way of communicating when they wanted to talk to each other, and a certain code language that they used and that kind of thing.
Check-in.
Is that what it's called?
No,
check in.
that's what they did.
Oh,
with
that's
each other, right?
yeah.
Was,
So anyway, these and in packing all kinds of stuff in a short period. Another short that I remember, and again, I'm not sure I remember the title of this. Maybe it was the one on miscarriage. Was it Black Hole? But WHOLE. Which was taking a family through their sense of loss and recovery as they had gone through a miscarriage, which of course can be devastating to a family, and reproducing the trauma and the reflection and the experience and the sense of loss. I mean, doing all that all at the same time, very visually. It's amazing sometimes, we have the expression, a picture is worth 1,000 words. It's amazing sometimes how much absence of dialogue leads to reflection about what's taking place.
It's good. It's good. Mm-hmm. Where you can find these? If you go to windriderstudios.org, they have all of the award-winning short films that we've featured at Sundance. And so they're all gathered in that one place, windriderstudios.org. You can join for a month for free and just sort of check it out. The film that we were talking about is called Grab My Hand.
Yeah.
A Letter to My Dad.
Yeah.
Grab my letter to my dad. And it was about doing a gate check.
Gate check. That was the expression. You're right.
Sure that you're doing well. Yeah,
that was a great piece. We have a carousel on our own webpage that is a Windrider carousel that takes some of the best of these and makes it available to people who are connected to the Hendricks Center as well, because we're really committed here as we think about public engagement and public space, about people thinking about the culture, the arts, what they deal with. And again, because we're talking about independent films, most people, when they think about films, they're thinking about what the major studios produce as entertainment. And in some cases, I say, to distract us from life in some cases. Even though sometimes good films that are produced by studios do have some underlying questions, they tend not to be as focused at the trauma and empathy and reflective elements as the stuff that you see at Sundance. You think that's a fair way to characterize the difference between what comes out of studios oftentimes and what comes out of these independent films?
Yeah, I say it's as simple as most studios are designed to comfort you. And so you walk in maybe feeling tired and beat down at the end of a week, and happy, bright ending kind of lifts your spirit. So they comfort the afflicted. Independent films, I think, tend to afflict the comfortable, coming after the powers that be, and saying something's wrong here, and we need to fix something. And so they're more about disturbing the piece than offering reassurance. And so it's a lot in a week-long experience to process that many kind of hard messages. But it gives you so much to think about that you carry throughout the rest of the year. Yeah, in fact, I tease the students that I go with. I say that I see more films in 1 week than I do probably in 4 years otherwise. So just the nature of my own life. But it is a really good tap into what people are wrestling with and why. Well, Claude and Craig, our time is up. I really thank you for taking the time to kind of help people understand what's going on in the arts, what's going on with independent films, what Sundance is about, what Windrider is, and just possibly encouraging people to think about a different way to listen to what's going on in the culture that might actually open up some vistas to see life from a little different angle and appreciate what's involved. So thank you all very much for the time. We'll see you in the snow.
Well, just right ahead. I mean, we're turning the corner here in Texas in terms of the weather. I know we haven't quite reached you in Phoenix, but we're praying for you, Craig. So I want to go ahead, Claude.
Nope, we're good.
Okay. I want to thank you for being a part of the table, and we hope you'll join us again soon. If you're interested in any other of our podcasts, you can see them at voice.dts.edu/table podcast, and we hope you'll join us again soon.
Thanks for listening to the Table Podcast. Dallas Theological Seminary. Teach truth, love well.